All right, good morning again. The other one said there was a bad connection, so I'm just going to jump right into the story. We have about 34 minutes before we have our Google Meet. Um, the next chapter is unputdownable, kind of like cheeseburgers. They are unputdownable. Again, I don't have my contacts in, so I'm going to be like this, and I know Ishmael makes fun of me, but that's all right. At least I'm reading. All right. James was lost. He suspected as much for some time, but now he was sure. The man at the garage just outside town had given him directions, but James hadn't written them down and now he'd forgotten most of them. He pulled the car into the parking lot by the library just so he could stop and have a think. Hmm. What he thought was that a library was probably a pretty good place to get some help. He got out of the car, he stretched, and he went in. The library was a decent size, especially for so small a town, and well stocked with books, albeit mostly rather old ones. The carpet looked a few years past its best. There are no there was no one at the desk at the moment. In fact, there seemed to be no one else there at all. So he wandered around the shelves for a while, occasionally picking up a book at random and pretending to look at it while keeping half an eye out for a member of the staff, but there was still nobody in sight. Are you looking for anything in particular? James squeaked slightly as he jumped in surprise, then spun around to see a small young woman with an unusual tall hairdo looking up at him with a smile. She had a badge pinned to her sweater that said Senior Library Assistant in printed letters, and then Mary handwritten in a black marker pen beneath. Where had she come from? And were all librarians so quiet? Did they come some did they get some kind of special ninja librarian training? Sorry, what? Said James. I said, are you looking for anything in particular? Actually, yes, said James. I'm looking for my home. The girl thought about this for a moment, still smiling. Well, she said, pointing to the nearest shelf, I'm pretty sure you won't find it in zoology. Not unless you're a snail, anyway. But then, a snail wouldn't ever lose its home, would he? Because it's on their back, the snail. She had a good smile, warm and mischievous at once, but James was too tired to fully appreciate it or her joking tone. In return, he only looked bemused. Sorry, said the girl. You're looking for your home. How do you mean? How can I help? I'm moving into a new place today. I rented a house near here. At least, I hope it's near here. Only I got a bit lost. I've been driving around for ages. I spent quite a while wondering why a town as small as this had two libraries. And then when I saw the third one and it looked exactly the same as the other two, I finally realized I was going around in circles. So I thought I'd stop and ask for some help. He made a helpless face. Help? Yep, said Mary, the assistant library. That one way system doesn't go so easily, does it? One way means like one way streets. I know like San Francisco has a lot of that. Heck, even Walmart now has one way aisles. That's my reminder that we have a Google Meet in 30 minutes. You know, my theory is that half the population of the town never actually meant to live here. They just came to do some shopping and never got out. Shall I draw you a map? That'd be great. I got some directions from the guy at the garage up the road there, but I forgot most of them. He called it the writer's house. You don't know anything about that, do you? Writer, unputdownable. Afraid not. So James told her the address of the house, and Mary found a road atlas and drew him a map. While she did, James browsed through the old books on a cart by the desk, marked book sale, withdrawn from stock. James picked one out almost at random, a thick, battered paperback priced in pencil on the first page at 25 pence. It wasn't the kind of thing he'd usually buy, but he took it anyway, paying with a handful of change as Mary handed him a map. Again, here's a break in the page, so I know that the scene's going to change or something's going to change. It wasn't far, and when he got there, he didn't take long to unpack. James had brought everything he owned in the world with him and found that he had fitted all too easily into the trunk and backseat of his car. And it wasn't a big car, meaning everything he owned fit into the car. His life had gone a bit wrong lately, but this was too. Oh, sorry. His life had gone a bit wrong lately, so this was to be his fresh start. He arranged his few possessions in their appropriate rooms while listening to music he didn't like on the radio. The house felt empty and unfamiliar, but then he reasoned it was empty and unfamiliar. When he was done, he made a mug of tea and sat on his bed to read for a while. He wasn't usually much of a reader. It was odd that he'd bought a book at all. But for the time being, he had no television, so he plowed through the first few chapters. It was diverting enough, just a cheap thriller, dumb and action-packed, like the movies he usually watched. In any case, he liked it enough to keep reading. In fact, it was odd, but while he knew it wasn't very good, really, he found for the first time in his life that he just wanted to carry on and keep reading. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? I do like those kind of books. It happens to me that you just can't put it down. What's next? What's next? What's next? That's why becoming reading, you can hide, you can become anybody you want, travel anywhere in the world because you invest in the book and you don't want to put it down. Okay, one of the benefits of becoming a reader. He had never understood before when someone called a book unputdownable. But here he was, frantically turning the pages, drinking in every badly written word, devouring the pages like a starved man, reading much faster than he had known he was able to. He read on, longer than he'd intended, only rather briefly and reluctantly, stopping to make and eat some supper. Then, with nothing pressing to occupy him after his meal, he decided he might as well continue. He raced through a few chapters in the armchair, so like in a chair in the living room. And then, when he started to feel chilly, he took the book to bed, intending to read just one more chapter before going to sleep. He finished it at 3:35 in the morning. He was puzzled that he needed so badly to go to get to the end of the book. But by then, he was too exhausted to really think too much about it. He slept deeply and solidly, but only until a little after dawn. Almost immediately on waking, he started to think about the book again. He hadn't liked the ending. His guess at who had committed the murder had been wrong, and he'd been disappointed by that. Only now he thought it wasn't he that was wrong. His was the right ending. The author of the book had it all wrong. So here he is as a reader saying, I have the perfect ending. You screwed up and wrote the wrong ending. Kind of sounds like something my mom would say. He got out of bed just long enough to find a pen. Then he got back in and turned to the back of the book. There were half a dozen blank pages right at the back. And with his cheap ballpoint pen, he started to write on these in tiny, densely packed letters. So for fun, he wrote down his own ending to the story. So sometimes in the back of books, they have blank pages, and I don't know why. This one has a chair. So he started to write his own ending in the back of the book. James was surprised to find that it came to him easily. It felt as if he wasn't even thinking about it, as if he wasn't thinking of the words and then writing them down. But instead, he was writing them down and then reading them. He was amazed and delighted by himself. He hadn't ever thought of himself as having a good imagination, or that he could write particularly well. And yet here he was pouring words onto a page, onto several pages, with the same determination with which he had read the book the previous night. He finished at the very end of the last page, a perfect fit, and sat back in the bed, slightly breathless, elated, and startled. He flicked through the pages. There was no mistakes, no crossing out, no corrections. He read the occasional sentence here and there as he glanced through. It seemed to be good, better, he thought, than the writing in the book itself. Well, where did that come from? He said to himself aloud. He stared at his hand accusingly, so he's talking to his hand. The pen had leaked some ink onto the fingertips, and now the hand almost didn't feel or look like it belonged to him. It was all very odd, but he guessed that he was just a bit disoriented by the move and a general feeling of not yet belonging. A huge yawn took hold of him and pushed such thoughts away. Breakfast, he said, and got up and had some. So another break in the page. I saw that somebody had joined, and now it's back down to one. Just me. 23 minutes to go. So after breakfast, James drove to town. He went to a supermarket full of harsh light and chirpy music and bought a number of things he needed for the house. He had written a list earlier and then left it on the kitchen table when he went out, but he was pretty sure he had remembered everything. That's what I always say. And then I buy $100 worth of stuff, and I only came in for 5 things, and I only bought 2 of the 5, along with all the other junk. Sorry. He also got a few things that hadn't been on the list. I know the feeling. But that suddenly seemed necessary once he saw them on the shelves. Kind of like me and potato chips. It seems necessary. hmm Excuse me. Then he made an excellent job of finding his way home again, only passing the library twice this time. Remember? He got lost and it was the same thing. He thought it was the 3 different libraries. Back home, he swore to himself briefly once he found his shopping list and realized all the things he had forgotten. Then he set about finding places for all that he had bought: the cupboard for plates and dishes, the one for cups and glasses, this one for jars and tins, and so on. There was little enough that it didn't take him long. A couple of items that he had bought on impulse he had left out on the kitchen table. A packet of 6 notebooks, and a pack of a dozen cheap ballpoint pens. James sat on the table. He didn't sit on the table. James sat at the table and stared at these. He couldn't remember why he bought them, but thinking back, he remembered he'd felt a small thrill as he placed them in his cart. Stupid, really. Oh well, now that he had them, the notebooks might as well be some use, he thought. He tore open the plastic wrapping and took one out. He needed to be more organized from now on. He told himself so. He decided to write a proper shopping list for tomorrow and a list of things he needed to do. He took a pen from the box and removed the cap. But he didn't write a list because as he folded back the cover of the book and looked at the empty page of the lined paper beneath, a thought occurred to him. He found he was thinking about a child he had seen sitting on a low wall outside the supermarket. A girl, maybe 12 years old. She looked as if she needed to cry but wasn't going to let herself. She was holding her lips tight together, looking first off to one side and then the other, as if trying to shake off the attention of someone who might look at her. James had wondered what her story was. Like, what is she doing outside? Why is she looking around? What's going on with her? Kind of like people watching. I like to people watch. And then, because he couldn't know, he made one up. So now he's going to make up his own ideas about this girl. A break in the writing, so I know the scene, the energy is changing. It was almost dark and he was hungry and his hand hurt. He felt as if he had just woken up, but he wasn't in bed. He was sitting at the kitchen table. He got up and switched the light on, feeling woozy and unsettled, stretched his arms out and his head back, trying to work the tension out of his muscles. He wished he could do the same for the tension inside his head. Then he looked down at the kitchen table and saw the notebook. It was open at a page about two-thirds of the way through, a page covered in writing. When he picked up the book and looked through it, he found that all the pages before that were the same. It was his handwriting, but he had no memory of writing it. James dropped the book onto the table in shock, backing away from it as if afraid, like, whoa, how did that all get there? Was he going mad? Mad as in crazy? When he had calmed down a little, he made a cup of tea, glancing at the book suspiciously out of the corner of his eye as he did so. Then he sat, picked up the book gingerly, swallowed hard, and began to read. It was really good. At least he was fairly certain it was good. It was much better than James could ever believe he was capable of writing. That was for sure. But there it was, in his handwriting. And as he read it, there was a dim ring of familiarity to it, as if he'd at least read the story before. But how could he have written it? He didn't write. He couldn't even tell stories very well, much less write them. But here was the story of the crying girl, richly imagined and set out in precise detail, beautifully and touchingly written. It was amazing, frightening too. He remembered a story he had heard on the news. There had been a man who had been hit on the head and had suddenly found that he could play the piano rather brilliantly, despite never having done so at all previously. James wondered if the same thing had happened with writing, and without being hit on the head. The whole thing seemed crazy. Luckily, his hunger helped distract him, and he set aside the book to make himself some cheese on toast. He wolfed it down, and in that way that you can when you're on your own and nobody watching. Then he made more and did it again, and did it, and at the end of it, he felt full and fulfilled, elated, in fact, and not at all tired. He couldn't decide what to do next, but anything seemed possible. 10 minutes later, he was fast asleep, fully clothed on his bed. Another break. When he woke late the next morning, he felt amazing. There was an energy in him like he had never known before, and a feeling of deep satisfaction. He sang to himself as he made a huge bowl of porridge for his breakfast. Porridge is like oatmeal, far too much for only one person. Then, when he had eaten it all, he had two pieces of thickly cut toast, generously buttered and laden with jam. Laden means covered with jam, like jelly. All of it washed down with mugs, plural, mugs of tea. And it all tasted incredible, like the best porridge, the best toast, the best jam, and the best tea ever made. He felt incredibly alive, his skin singing. Skin singing? That's kind of creepy. My skin doesn't sing. His mind happily racing. He looked at the notebook, half expecting it to be empty, to discover he had dreamed the whole thing. Or else it would be full of gibberish. But no, it was as he remembered it. Still, so far as he could judge, very good, maybe even brilliant. This morning he found it easier to just accept it, somehow. And he had other things on his mind too. He had decided to look for a job, just temporarily. He had enough money put aside that he could get by for a while, but he wanted something to do to keep his mind and body occupied. Another trip to town, to the job center, was called for. So he showered and dressed and drove off in his complaining heap of a car. He hadn't planned to go to the library, but the parking lot beside it was convenient. And while he was there, he thought he might as well. The same girl, Mary, was behind the desk, filing buff colored record cards. She looked up at the sound of the door opening. Oh, hello again. Hell, well, hello again, lost boy. Did you find your way home? Yes, thanks. And now that you're living in the neighborhood, I suppose you figured you'd join the library, like all solid, upstanding citizens should. Speaking of that, how many of you have an actual library card from the middle school? Or it's a county library, thanks to Mrs. Preciado helping with getting all the important stuff. That was kind of weird, but Mrs. Preciado has a lot to do with extending the library hours. But I believe, ooh, look at that hair. Middle school, you're going to need your own library card. Anyway, sorry. Yes, said James. Actually, the thought hadn't occurred to him even for a moment. He had never joined the library in his life. Why would he? But now, somehow, the idea appealed to him. What do I need to do? Here you go. Mary plucked a photocopied sheet of paper from a plastic holder on the front of the counter and offered it to him with a theatrical flourish. Here you go. Like, here's the rules. This is what you need to do to get the library card. Just fill in this form, bring us some idea and proof of address, and that's pretty much it. I'd take you through it in detail, but it's all pretty self explanatory unless you're some kind of idiot. That's not what you want to say to somebody trying to get a library card. And you want to join the library, so you're clearly not. James glanced down at the form. Well, I don't know about that, he said, but I think I'll manage. Thanks. I'll see you in a day or two. He made for the door, and Mary waved him a distracted goodbye as she returned her attention to her record cards. See you later, navigator. Another break. James didn't get home until early evening at the end. After a fruitless visit to the employment agency and then a large, unhealthy, hugely enjoyable lunch in a cafe, he made a spontaneous trip to the movie theater and accidentally saw the beginning and end. He slept soundly through the middle of a black and white German film. While he had been out, the story he had written hadn't even crossed his mind. But now that he was home, he found himself thinking about it again. The notebook was on the kitchen table, open at the final page of writing. He thought he would read through it one more time. But when he sat down, instead of turning back to start of the book, he unthinkingly turned over to a blank page. Why he had done that, he wondered. And then he noticed that he had picked up the pen, which was odd, as he had no intention of writing anything. He had bare he had barely a thought in his head after all, or he hadn't. Now, actually, there was something, or the beginning of something, at least. His hand hurt again. Another break. His hand hurt again, but it took some time to notice because his head hurt so much more. Something else was wrong too. If only he could work it out what it was. Perhaps if it wasn't so dark, it would be easier. He wondered why his cheek felt so cold. Ah, yes, he was lying on the kitchen floor. That was it. One of his legs was tangled up in the chair, though. He didn't realize this until he tried and failed to stand up. Now his knee hurt too. He freed his leg from the toppled chair and carefully raised himself to his feet to take stock of the situation. He supposed he must have fallen asleep at the table and fallen off his chair. He touched a hand to his head and discovered this was a very he dis He touched a hand to his head and discovered that this was a very effective way of being in yet more pain. Ooh, ow. Yeah, duh, because you're touching it. He stumbled about until he found the light switch, then made his way up to the bathroom to stand in front of the mirror and survey the damage. He wasn't bleeding, that was good, but his cheek was very red, and he suspected that he'd gained a pretty respectable bump on his head by the morning. He parted his hair at the sight of the pain and tried to take a look in the mirror, but he couldn't really see. He was reminded again, though, of the stiffness and pain in his fingers. He took a look at the right hand, turning it and flexing the fingers. The discomfort was freshly familiar, jolting his memory. He'd been writing again. He could vaguely recall, but what he had, no idea. All right, so we're going to start our Google Meet in about 4 minutes. I'm going to run to the restroom, maybe get some coffee or get some water. I'll be right back. I'll be right back on Google Meet. This will be uploaded for chapter 11, part 3, because remember, part 1 cut out after like 2 minutes. All right, see you in a couple of minutes.